The leader, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to recover. "What's that supposed to mean?" he said, his voice shaking slightly. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a deliberate step closer, his calm gaze never leaving them. The silence was deafening, and everyone watching could feel that something monumental was about to happen. The man took another step forward, his steady eyes fixed on the leader of the group. The teen froze, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the man's silent authority. In a voice calm, but filled with strength, the man finally spoke. "You think strength is about yelling and pushing people around. Let me tell you what real strength is." His voice cut through the silence like a blade, commanding attention from everyone at the bus stop. He pointed to the photo in his hand. "These men and I fought for the freedom you take for granted. We faced fear, hardship, and loss so you could live in peace. And this," he said, gesturing to their behavior, "is how you choose to use it." The teens stood there, speechless, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. But just as the leader started to stammer an apology, the man raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to teach you. Life isn't about tearing others down. It's about lifting each other up." Then, in a surprising twist, he turned to the rest of the people at the bus stop. "And for those of you who stood by silently," he said, his voice firm but not angry, "remember, courage isn't just about fighting. It's about standing up for what's right." The bus arrived, and as the man boarded, the group stood in stunned silence. The onlookers were left with a mix of admiration and reflection, knowing they had all witnessed something far greater than a simple confrontation. As the bus pulled away, the teens stood quietly, their earlier confidence replaced by a thoughtful silence. The leader glanced at his friends, then down at the ground, clearly wrestling with what had just happened. One of them muttered, "We messed up," and the others nodded, that arrogance now fully deflated. The people at the bus stop began to disperse, some shaking their heads in shame, others stealing one last glance at the man's retreating figure. A young woman, who had been watching from a distance, finally spoke up. "You didn't just teach them," she said softly, "he taught all of us." For the teens, the lesson was clear. Strength isn't about intimidation or ego, but about character, respect, and standing up for what's right. And for everyone else, it was a moment to reflect on the power of quiet courage. The Marine veteran left without saying much, but his actions spoke volumes, leaving an impact none of them would ever forget. It was an ordinary day at a quiet bus stop until things took a shocking turn. A group of loud, unruly teens showed up, throwing insults and mocking an older black man who was sitting silently, minding his own business. Their words were cruel, their behavior outrageous. They assumed he was an easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back. But what they didn't know was that this man wasn't just any passerby. Beneath his calm exterior was a Marine veteran, a man who had faced far greater challenges than their petty harassment. As the tension built, the teens grew bolder, testing the limits of the man's patience. Little did they realize, they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. Stay tuned as we uncover how this veteran's calm strength and powerful response turned the tables in an unexpected way. This story will leave you thinking twice about judging someone by appearances. The teens kept pushing, their voices growing louder with taunts and laughter. They circled around the man, throwing insults and trying to provoke a reaction. To them, he seemed like an easy target, quiet, composed, and alone. But what they couldn't see was the deep resilience in his eyes, a quiet strength that came from years of discipline and experience. He didn't flinch, didn't respond, and that only fueled that arrogance. Other people at the bus stop began to shift uncomfortably, unsure of whether to step in or stay out of it. Some glanced at the man with pity, while others looked away, pretending not to notice. Still, he sat there, unmoved, as if he was waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to make the next move. What the teens didn't know was that this man had endured far worse, and the lesson they were about to learn would be unforgettable. The teens, emboldened by the man's silence, started to take things further. One of them stepped closer, tossing a crumpled piece of paper at his feet, while the others egged him on. "What's wrong, old man? Cat got your tongue." One of them jeered, his tone laced with mockery. Still, the man didn't react. He remained seated, his gaze steady, his hands resting calmly on his knees. To the onlookers, it was a tense and uncomfortable scene. Some whispered amongst themselves, wondering why he wasn't doing anything. A mother pulled her child closer, while an elderly man shook his head, muttering under his breath. But one thing was clear: everyone was waiting to see how this would unfold. What the teens didn't realize was that every move they made was being observed, calculated. The man wasn't ignoring them. He was deciding how to respond. And when he did, it wouldn't be what anyone expected. The leader of the group, a lanky teen with a cocky smirk, stepped even closer, standing just inches from the man. He leaned in, waving his hand mockingly. "You deaf or something? Say something." The others burst into laughter, encouraged by his boldness. The air was thick with tension, and the quiet man finally raised his head, locking eyes with the teen. There was something in his gaze, calm, firm, and unshaken. It wasn't anger, but a steady confidence that made the teen pause for just a moment. That flicker of hesitation wasn't lost on the man, but he said nothing, simply adjusting his posture as if preparing for something. The teens exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, their laughter faded, replaced by an edge of uncertainty. The onlookers, now fully drawn into the scene, leaned forward, sensing that something big was about to happen. The man hadn't said a word, but it was clear the tables were turning. Just as the teens began to shift uneasily, the man finally stood up. He wasn't tall, but his presence seemed to grow as he straightened his posture and adjusted his jacket. The group fell silent, their bravado wavering under his calm yet commanding demeanor. For a moment, it seemed like he might speak, but instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn, folded paper. He unfolded it slowly, revealing a photograph, him in uniform, surrounded by his Marine unit. The edges were creased, and the image had clearly been carried for years. He held it up, wordlessly showing it to the group. The teens stared, their eyes darting between the photo and the man. The realization began to sink in. This wasn't just a quiet stranger. This was a man who had seen and endured more than they could imagine.